What if the beads around a woman's waist could remember every secret, every betrayal, every spell cast in silence? Would you still admire them or fear them? Welcome to a story where beauty becomes power and tradition becomes weapon. This is The Beads of a Dama. It all began on a Thursday evening just after sunset when the call came through to the cantonment's police station. The officer on duty, Sergeant Ibo Mensah, nearly dropped his lukewarm coffee when the voice on the other end whispered, "There's a man lying naked outside the Marula Grand Hotel, and he's not breathing." Within minutes, a patrol unit arrived at the scene. The Marula Grand Hotel stood tall, opulent and proud, its chandeliers glowing like golden stars through wide glass panes. But outside, in the dim light by the valet entrance, lay a well-dressed man, or at least he had been. Now he was shirtless, missing a shoe and unconscious. His name was Nathan Opoku, a wealthy businessman known for his flamboyant lifestyle and countless affairs. He was breathing, barely. A crimson mark circled his neck as if a necklace had been yanked off with force. But what caught everyone's attention wasn't the state of his body. It was what hung around his waist. Red waist beads. Not just any beads. Thick, glossy, shimmering in the moonlight. Strung with black and gold spacers, tightly knotted around his abdomen like they were his, though everyone knew they weren't. Paramedics arrived. As they rushed Nathan into the ambulance, murmurs swept the crowd forming nearby. "EI, it's those beads. The red ones. I told you those things aren't just for beauty. Some of them hold spirits." "Ah, but he's a man. Why is he wearing woman beads?" Videos surfaced online before midnight. TikTok clips, blurry photos, WhatsApp statuses. Trait waist bead curse. Inch-red beads Accra. The bead witch. The mystery gripped Accra like wildfire. The next morning, it was all over the news. Business mogul found unconscious with waist beads. Police investigating possible ritual motive. The headline flashed on Joy News TV. Panelists debated it on morning radio. Prophets warned of end-time seductions. Youths joked about it in memes. But one woman was silent, calm, unmoved by the storm. She stood before a mirror in her East Legon apartment, brushing her long natural hair. Around her waist shimmered a fresh set of beads, green and gold this time. But on her dresser, lying in a velvet pouch, were the infamous red ones. Her name was Adama, and she knew exactly what had happened. Detective Kojo Mensah, no relation to Sergeant Ibo, was handed the case by lunchtime. He was a no-nonsense officer, tall, sharp-eyed, always 2 steps ahead. But this case? It smelled different. The rumors surrounding waist beads were as old as Ghana's independence, tied to love, lust, protection, and danger. Kojo had heard the whispers before, but now one had landed on his desk. Back at the station, Kojo called for the CCTV footage from the hotel. They scanned the lobby feed from the night before. At 10:22 p.m., Nathan Opoku was seen walking confidently into the hotel bar, dressed in a navy caftan and gold-rimmed glasses. He ordered his signature cocktail, the Dark Storm. At 11:09 p.m., a woman walked in. She was stunning. Tall, with glowing skin and an afro that bounced with every step. She wore a black satin dress, short, daring. But it was the way she moved that caught attention, like water gliding, like the rhythm of a drum no one else could hear. Kojo zoomed in. She had on a necklace of red beads, and a flash of something at her waistline as she leaned to whisper in Nathan's ear. Within minutes they left together. That was the last clear footage. Kojo leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. "Who are you?" he muttered. A junior officer knocked and entered with a file. "Sir, we asked around. Hotel staff said she calls herself a dama. She sells beads at art exhibitions and fashion expos. No official business license. Works cash and mobile money. Moves like a ghost." Kojo looked up, intrigued. A ghost? Or a hunter? Across town, Adama poured herself a cup of hibiscus tea and turned on her incense burner. Her room was full of soft drapes, ancient carvings, and rows upon rows of colored beads hanging on rods. Each color had a story, each strand a purpose. She didn't speak to many, But every client she chose had a reason. She walked over to her desk, pulled out a journal, and scribbled. Nathan broke the rule. He thought the beads were decoration. He didn't know they listened. She closed the book and placed it beside a photo of an old woman, her grandmother, smiling with wisdom in her eyes. In the days that followed, more questions arose. Nathan had woken up, but couldn't speak. His tongue was swollen, his memory fractured. He couldn't remember what happened after the woman whispered in his ear. But Kojo wasn't waiting for him to remember. He was already heading toward the next African Art Expo in OSU, because he knew if Adama was there, so were the answers. And the red beads? They were watching everything. The OSU art market was alive with color, rhythm, and the scent of roasted ground nuts and shea butter. It was Saturday afternoon, and the annual African Soul Expo was in full swing, a melting pot of local artisans, designers, dancers, and curious onlookers. Music from a live kora player floated through the air like a charm, settling softly on every ear. Detective Kojo Mensah walked through the crowd with a deliberate pace, eyes scanning every stall. His casual shirt and dark jeans blended in, but his mind was on high alert. The woman in the CCTV footage haunted him. It wasn't just her beauty, it was the mystery she carried like perfume. He passed stalls selling woven baskets, carved stools, and vintage Ankara shirts. Then he saw her. Her stall wasn't the loudest or flashiest. It was simple. A white canopy with floating veils and earthy tones. But it pulled people in like gravity. The sign above read, "Beads of Memory" by Adama, and there she stood, barefoot, dressed in a flowing white wrapper with golden trimming, waist beads glistening like the sun against her skin. Her skin glowed as though kissed by moonlight. Her hair was wrapped in gold-threaded fabric, but a few curls escaped playfully, framing her face. Kojo slowed his pace. A woman in her 42nd stood in front of the stall, giggling as Adama wrapped a multicolored strand around her waist. "These are for attraction, yes?" the woman whispered. Adama smiled without looking up. "No. These are for remembrance." "Remembrance? Your spirit knows what it has forgotten. These beads help it remember." Kojo stood at the edge of the crowd, watching. Her voice was soft but carried weight, like honey with a hidden kick of ginger. The way people leaned in told him everything. This wasn't just a seller. This was a keeper of something sacred. A young man brushed past him, whispering to a friend, "That's the bead woman they were talking about online. She's fine, but deadly. Her beads silence men." Kojo made his way forward. When he reached the front of the stall, she looked up, straight into his eyes. Time faltered for a second. She knew who he was, and he knew that she knew. "Detective," she said with a knowing smile, "you don't wear beads." Kojo blinked. "How do you know that? Because if you did, you wouldn't be standing like your energy is running from itself." A few people laughed gently, but Kojo didn't. He stepped closer. "I have some questions." Adama turned to a small table, picked up a calabash filled with warm water and lavender leaves, and poured it into a wooden bowl. "Then sit. But first cleanse your hands. We don't ask sacred questions with dusty fingers." Kojo hesitated. Was this a game? A manipulation? Or something deeper? He dipped his hands into the bowl. Warm, fragrant, soothing. He sat. Adama leaned against the post of her stall and folded her arms. "Ask." Kojo pulled out his notebook. "Do you know a man named Nathan Opoku?" "I do not. He was found unconscious outside Marula Grand. Someone saw you with him?" She didn't flinch. "And did they also see what he did before that?" Kojo tilted his head. "What did he do?" Adama reached into a chest behind her, pulling out a strand of beads, thick, dark blue, with clear quartz stones embedded between. She rolled them in her palm like rosary beads. "Some men think beads are toys. Others know they are diaries. They record every touch, every betrayal, every energy that comes too close." Kojo watched her carefully. "So, you were with him?" "I was near him. He asked for beads. I refused. He took one anyway." Kojo frowned. "He stole them?" "He thought he could wear them like a trophy. He did not know the red ones were bound." "Bound?" Adama met his eyes, her voice calm. "Bound to blood, to memory, to rules. Kojo scribbled quickly, though he wasn't sure how to explain this on a police report. Who made them? My grandmother. And where is she now? Adama's gaze softened. Gone. But not absent. She walked to a side shelf and took down a photo in a carved wooden frame. It was an old woman, regal and fierce-eyed, holding a child wrapped in kente. She made beads not for fashion, but for protection. She always said the most dangerous strands are the ones people wear out of pride. Kojo flipped to a new page. Have your beads hurt anyone before? That depends, Adama said, on whether you believe truth hurts. As Kojo left the market that evening, he couldn't shake the way Adama had spoken. Calm, confident, ancient, like someone who remembered more than she had lived. He opened his phone and played back the hotel footage one more time. She wasn't in a hurry. She wasn't hiding. She wanted to be seen. But why? As he passed a group of young girls dancing azonto to a live drum beat, he noticed something. Each of them wore beads, green, orange, yellow, purple. And suddenly he realized something chilling. This wasn't just about one woman. This was about a whole world hiding in plain sight. And Adama? She was only the beginning. The following day, Detective Kojo Mensah sat across from his grandmother in her modest but tidy living room in Jamestown, Accra. The smell of smoked fish stew and contamire wafted from the kitchen as the old woman stirred her pot and hummed an tune that Kojo hadn't heard since childhood. She wasn't just his grandmother, she was a living archive. Kojo had seen things in the past few days that logic couldn't explain. So he came to the one woman who always spoke the truth, even if it sounded like madness. Grandma, he began, do you know anything about red waist beads? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned down the fire under her pot, wiped her hands on a cloth, and walked slowly to the couch. Her knees cracked with age, but her eyes were still sharp, the kind that made men confess without a word. Who asked you that question, Kojo? No one. I'm asking you now. She stared at him, lips pursed, then slowly sat. Why? He hesitated. A man wore them. He almost died. That got her attention. Red beads? She asked softly. On a man? Kojo nodded. Then he crossed a river he wasn't invited to. His grandmother leaned back, sighing like the memory was too heavy to carry but too sacred to ignore. You know, in our days, beads weren't for show. They spoke, they remembered, and they warned. Kojo leaned in. Different colors meant different things. Yellow for fertility, blue for peace, white for purity, green for growth, black for mystery. But red was always for something deeper. What deeper? Blood, passion, war, lust, protection, revenge. She paused. Not everyone had the right to wear red, especially not men. Those strands were made by women who had been marked, women who had been betrayed, harmed, or touched by spirits. They carried those beads like loaded weapons. Kojo blinked. Weapons? Yes, she said. Some of the old ones could tie a man's strength with one bead. Others could trap a liar's tongue. A few could kill if they were disrespected. Kojo rubbed his temple. But how? They were consecrated, bathed in herbs, prayed over, some even buried for days under the moon. It wasn't fashion. It was covenant. He sat back, overwhelmed. So if Adama's grandmother made those kinds of beads, then she's not just a seller, his grandmother finished. She's a gatekeeper. Kojo stood. I need to find out more about these legends, the people who still practice them. His grandmother nodded. Then start where the beads began. Not in the markets, but in the stories. That evening, Kojo returned to his apartment with a flash drive his grandmother handed him. It contained audio files from a project she once worked on for the Ghana Folklore Board, interviews with old bead makers across the Volta region, Ashanti, and the North. He plugged in the drive and played the first file. An old voice crackled through the speakers. We don't choose the beads choose us. If a woman wears the wrong strand, she will either lose her lover, lose her mind, or lose her path. But if she wears the right one, she becomes more than woman. She becomes memory itself. Another file. There was a woman in Ningo Pram Pram, who wore beads that could make a man forget his own name. Not from seduction, from shame, because they reflected back the evil he thought no one could see. And another, the red ones are not for dancing, they're for justice. Kojo sat in silence, the weight of what he was learning settling in his bones. This wasn't superstition, it was system, structure, power disguised as tradition. Meanwhile, across the city, Adama stood barefoot in a circle of burning sage, her eyes closed. She was in a small compound in Teshi, an ancestral prayer house. The walls were lined with aged murals of women wearing beads around their hips and carrying calabashes of light. The voice of the high priestess echoed in the room. "You have broken the rule, child." Adama kept her head low. The red ones were not meant to be worn again, especially not on one who did not receive them. Adama spoke, her voice laced with guilt. "He took them without permission. I tried to warn him." The priestess stepped forward. Her face was painted in white clay, and her body adorned with strands that jingled softly as she walked. "You know the red strands are memory. They are pain. They are vengeance. When worn by the wrong hands, they do not protect. They punish." "I didn't intend it," Adama whispered. "Intentions do not stop consequences," the priestess said. "Now others will come looking. They will not ask the truth, they will accuse. And the beads will speak, whether you defend yourself or not." Later that night, Adama sat alone, journal open. "My grandmother warned me, never let the red beads taste dishonor again. But Nathan, he treated the sacred like glitter. Now everything has changed." She looked at her phone. Notifications flooded her Instagram. "Bead witch. How many men have you silenced? Teach me your secret, I want revenge too." And the one that chilled her most, "I know what you are. You think you're the only one who knows the old ways?" Mame Ka, Adama's blood ran cold. Mame Korkor, her former sister in beads, the one who had broken the sacred circle years ago, the one who had disappeared into the shadows of the city and returned whispering to the highest bidder. If Mame was back, then this wasn't about beads anymore. It was war. Detective Kojo Mensah leaned against the hood of his unmarked car, parked just outside the Akora Art Lounge in Airport Residential. Inside, the city's elite sipped cocktails, traded business cards, and admired overpriced sculptures. Kojo wasn't here for the art. He was watching Adama again. She stood under the golden chandelier in the main hall, dressed in deep maroon this time, her waist beads glinting through a high-cut side slit. Her laughter was soft, measured, never too loud, never too inviting. But every man she spoke to leaned in a little closer than they should. Kojo's phone buzzed. Text from HQ, Nathan Opoku speaking. "Recovered. Says he wants to talk. Only to you." Kojo's eyes narrowed. Before he could reply, he saw something. No, someone. Mame Korkor. At first he wasn't sure, but the woman walking past the entrance was unmistakable. Tall, dark braids wrapped around her head like a crown of serpents. She moved like smoke, the kind that leaves ruin behind. Kojo entered the lounge. Inside, the air buzzed with jazz and perfume. Waiters weaved through guests with trays of jollof canapes and palm wine shots. Kojo moved past a sculpted brass giraffe and approached the bar, where Adama was sipping something green and glowing. "You again," she said, without turning. "You knew I was here." "Of course," she replied. "You wear suspicion like a second skin." Kojo sat beside her. "I spoke to your old friend, Mame Korkor. That got her attention." "She's back?" Her tone sharpened. "I saw her near the entrance. She didn't come in." Adama sipped again, slower this time. "She's not the type to enter light. She prefers shadows." Kojo studied her face. "You haven't told me the full truth. No one ever does," she replied. "Not even you. I'm not the one with enchanted beads." She turned to him, her voice suddenly low, intimate. "You think it's enchantment that draws men to me? No, Kojo. It's the truth they see in me. The part they fear." He felt it again. The pull, not of her body, of her presence, like standing on the edge of a cliff and wanting to jump. "You're dangerous," he said. Adama smiled. only to men who pretend they're not. They danced. Kojo didn't plan it. One moment they were at the bar, the next she had pulled him onto the floor, where a live band played soft high life. She didn't move fast. Her hips rolled like waves, her arms guided by rhythm older than drums. Kojo followed. He forgot the case, forgot Nathan, forgot Mame Korkor. For a few minutes there was only her, the scent of shea butter and hibiscus oil, the soft clink of beads brushing against his shirt. Later, in her car, an old Mercedes passed down from her grandmother, Adama drove Kojo through Osu's back roads. "I don't take men home," she said, "but I'll take you somewhere special." They stopped at a quiet, hidden courtyard. There a small shrine stood under a baobab tree surrounded by strands of hanging beads, like a curtain of color separating the living from the spirits. "This," she said, stepping into the circle, "was my grandmother's prayer ground. No man has ever stood here." Kojo hesitated. She turned. "You're not like the others. You seek truth, not possession." He stepped forward. The beads brushed his face as he entered. Inside the circle, Adama placed his hand on her waist. "Feel them," she whispered. "Not with your fingers, with your spirit." He did, and something pulsed. Not magic, memory. He saw flashes, not his own, but hers. A little girl weaving her first strand beside a fire, and a woman slapping her for using the wrong herb. Blood on a bed. A man crying as he held red beads in his hand. Kojo pulled back, breathless. "What was that?" "Truth," she said, "and now you carry it too." But as he left the courtyard later that night, something tickled at his neck. A chill. And from the rooftop of a nearby building, a figure watched. Mame Korkor. She smiled in the dark, clutching a strand of jagged black beads in her palm. "You've chosen your side, Adama," she whispered. "But you forgot I still have your first strand." The village of Asukoko lay 2 hours north of Accra, forgotten by maps but never by memory. It was there, under the eyes of the forest and beside the river that sang only at night, that the first bead was made. And it was there that Adama had once been initiated. The journey back was silent. She had driven alone, beads hidden beneath her clothes, her heart a mixture of fear and fire. The city had awakened something dangerous, and Mame Korkor's message proved what Adama feared. The rules had been broken, and now, to fix what was coming, she had to remember where it all began. She arrived just before sunset. The village was quiet, bathed in orange light, its red soil warm beneath her sandals. Children played in the distance. A goat bleated lazily. But the shrine, the old hut by the river, stood untouched, sacred, heavy with history. Inside, the air smelled of earth, charcoal, and old prayers. Adama kneeled before the central mat and unpacked the items. In a carved gourd of river water. In a calabash of shea butter. In 3 white candles. A small bag of red beads. A strand of her own hair, cut freshly that morning. She lit the candles in a triangle around her, dipped her fingers into the water, and whispered the words her grandmother had taught her. Let memory return. Let silence speak. Let the beads bind what was broken. Her mind drifted into a trance, and suddenly the world around her began to shift. She was no longer in the shrine. She was 8 years old again, sitting before her grandmother beneath the moon. The old woman's voice echoed in her ears. Beads are not for beauty, they are for truth. Some tell the truth sweetly, others, with fire. Adama remembered the night of her own binding. She had just reached her first menses, and her grandmother had declared her ready. That night, she was led into the river, naked and trembling. Women circled her, singing old songs that spoke of strength, temptation, and protection. As they sang, her grandmother tied the first beads around her waist, green for growth, white for clarity, and red for memory. This strand, her grandmother whispered, is not to be worn unless you've been wounded, unless your spirit has split but still stands. It is the strand of women who survive fire and return with their hands full of ash and wisdom. Adama hadn't understood then, but years later, after the betrayal, after the man who tricked her into love and left her bleeding, she wore the red beads again. And with them came the truth. Back in the shrine, Adama opened her eyes, the candles flickered, and the red beads glowed faintly in the dim light. She took the strand and whispered over them, binding them again. You will not serve revenge. You will not serve lust. You will return to memory. She tied the strand with a final knot, her hands trembling, and as she did, the wind outside howled. At that exact moment in the city, Mame Korkor stood in front of a mirror in her apartment. She wore a black satin robe and no beads, except for one, a single strand of Adama's first creation. A broken strand, taken years ago after a bitter fallout, and now, corrupted. Mame held it over a clay bowl and dropped ashes into it. She thinks she's the only one who remembers the old ways. She added oil, herbs, and something darker, a drop of her own blood. The beads sizzled and tightened. If she won't wear her fire, I'll wear it for her. Meanwhile, Kojo sat in his office, replaying his encounter with Adama. He still couldn't explain the vision, the memories that weren't his but lived in his skin now. He searched online, in journals, old PDF scans of anthropology dissertations. One paper stood out. The Sacred Waste, Beads as Tools of Spiritual Warfare in West African Traditions. He read aloud to himself. Beads made during ritual periods, such as initiation, mourning, childbirth, or betrayal, often carry energy stronger than any amulet. They can awaken or silence, attract or destroy, depending on their consecration. Kojo paused. Betrayal. Could that be it? Was the bead on Nathan's body a revenge bead? He picked up his phone and dialed. Adama, it's me. We need to talk. Now. Her voice came through, calm but distant. I'm not in Accra. Where are you? I'm trying to stop something. What? A pause. Another version of me, but without a conscience. Then she hung up. As the night deepened in Asukoko, Adama walked to the riverbank. She buried the red beads beneath a tree, the same one her grandmother had used years ago. Then she stood and whispered to the night, let her come, let her try. I am not the same girl she once knew. Far away, in Accra, Mame Korkor smiled at her mirror, her own eyes glowing faintly. Neither am I. The hospital room where Nathan Opoku lay recovering was sterile, quiet, and heavily guarded. His wife had left town after the scandal broke. His business partners were pulling out of deals, and the tabloids had already crowned him the man who fell for the beads. But Nathan? He remembered nothing. Or so he said. Detective Kojo Mensah entered the room with a notepad, eyes sharp and tired. It had been 5 days since the incident. Nathan sat upright, face thinner, eyes darting like a man who had seen something he didn't want to remember. Kojo pulled a chair up. You said you'd talk. Nathan shifted uncomfortably. Yes, but I want immunity. I don't want this in the news. Kojo didn't flinch. If someone almost killed you, this is already in the news. Nathan's hand trembled as he reached for a bottle of water. It wasn't like that. I didn't think it would go that far. Start from the beginning. Nathan took a deep breath. I met her at an expo. She wasn't selling beads that day, just looking. But she stood out. She had on a green head wrap and this energy, you know? Kojo nodded silently. We spoke. She told me about the beads, said each strand was coded, that every bead held a memory, a word, a story. I laughed, told her I liked beautiful things, and she let you buy one? No, Nathan said quickly. She said I wasn't ready, said certain beads weren't for men like me. Kojo raised an eyebrow. So how did you get the red ones? Nathan lowered his voice. I took them. I waited till she left the booth. I saw them on the side table, wrapped in black cloth. They were different. They felt powerful. You stole them. Nathan swallowed. Yes. What happened after? Nathan's hand gripped the sheet. That night I wore them to meet her. I thought she'd be flattered, that I understood her culture or whatever. But when she saw them, Kojo leaned forward. What did she do? Nathan's eyes widened. Her face changed, like I had summoned something. She said I had no idea what I'd just invited. I told her to relax. Then everything went blank. Blank. I remember pain. Fire in my stomach. A loud ringing in my ears. Then nothing. Kojo closed his notebook slowly. You said you wanted immunity, but immunity from what? Nathan hesitated. There was someone else there. Kojo froze. Ooh, she was watching from the shadows. Same height, different energy. Her beads were black, not like Adama's. Mame Korkor, Kojo muttered. Nathan nodded. She didn't stop it. I think she wanted it to happen. Kojo left the hospital with a deeper frown than he'd arrived with. The pieces were fitting together, too perfectly. Mame Korkor had been there. She wanted Nathan to steal those beads. She had used him to ignite something between her and Adama, something ancient, unresolved. Meanwhile, in her apartment, Mame Korkor stood over a white mannequin, carefully tying strands of dark beads around its waist. Each strand had jagged stones, ashes sealed in resin, and twisted patterns no ordinary eye would understand. Fools, she whispered, tightening the last knot. They think this is about broken love stories. They think this is about seduction. She stepped back, admired the mannequin, then turned to the mirror. I'm not after hearts, I'm after memory, I'm after truth, I'm after power. She opened a drawer and pulled out an old photo, a black and white image of young Adama and herself in the village of Asukoko, smiling with their first beads around their waists. Below the photo, scrawled in charcoal, only one of us will wear the red strand at the final moon. Mame traced the words with her finger. Time's almost up, sister. That evening, Adama returned to Accra. She stepped off the bus with dust on her feet and a calm fire in her eyes. She had left the red beads behind in the village, buried under the baobab tree. But her spirit knew the war was now in the city, in the air, in the eyes of men, in the whispers of girls wearing beads they didn't understand. She walked past a street corner where two girls giggled, both in crop tops, their beads peeking beneath their jeans. I heard if you wear purple and red together, your ex will come back, one said. Nah, I want black. My mother said black makes you untouchable. Adama didn't interrupt them. But as she passed, she whispered to herself. When the sacred becomes fashion, consequences follow quietly. Kojo waited for her outside her apartment. You spoke to him, she said. Yes. He stole your red strand, but someone else wanted him to. Adama's eyes narrowed. Korkor, Kojo nodded. She's playing a long game. She always was. He looked at her, unsure whether he was speaking to a suspect, a witness, or a woman standing between realms. What happens next? Adama didn't answer immediately. Then softly, next, we prepare for the full moon. By day, the house at the end of Lebone Crescent looked abandoned, vines curling up its weathered walls, paint peeled by time and sea breeze. But by night, warm candlelight flickered behind the slats of shuttered windows. Whispers rose from its walls like the breath of sleeping spirits. This house had no address. Only those who were called could find it. Adama stood at the gate, dressed in a black caftan lined with ash-gray embroidery. Around her waist, only one strand of beads, a blend of ivory and deep brown, beads of truth and reckoning. Kojo followed a few steps behind. He had insisted on coming despite her warning. If you cross this threshold, she told him earlier that day, you'll see the parts of the city that don't exist on any map. I've already seen too much, he had said. Might as well know what I'm standing in. Now, as Adama pushed the creaking gate open, the scent of incense and salt welcomed them like an old song. They stepped into the courtyard. Women sat in circles, some young, others ancient, all wrapped in white or earth-toned fabrics. Beads of every color and material adorned their waists, arms, ankles, even woven into their hair. Some had closed eyes, in trance. Others ground herbs. One painted symbols in white chalk on a clay board. Kojo's eyes scanned the space like a tourist in a sacred museum. This, he whispered, is a society? Adama nodded. Not just a society, a sisterhood. We are the daughters of Ananse. At the center of the compound stood an open pavilion. A wide wooden platform held 7 chairs, all carved in the shape of ancient queens. Only one was occupied. The elder beater, Mama Nyamakai. Her skin was deep and folded with time, her eyes sharp as thorns. Around her neck, dozens of strands hung like necklaces of memory. She raised a hand. Silence swept the courtyard. "You return," she said, her voice like wind passing through bones. "With city dust and a man at your side." Adama bowed slightly. "Forgive me, Mama. He is necessary." The elder turned her gaze to Kojo. "He is smoke, unsettled, but brave. Let him witness." Kojo bowed, unsure if it was enough. Mama Nyamike gestured for them to come forward. Adama spoke clearly. "Mame Korkor has returned. She's using the corrupted strand." Gasps. Beads clinked. A woman with gray braids stood. "I told you." She would return for the red one. The final strand, another chimed in. She left the circle with anger. She burned her beads in the river. "She can't wear power again." Mama Nyamike raised a hand. "She didn't burn them. She buried them. And one of those strands belonged to Adama." All eyes turned. Kojo's voice was calm. "You mean the one Nathan wore?" Mama nodded. "The blood remembers. It always remembers." Adama stepped into the circle of elders. "She's not just trying to harm. She's building something. She's crafting dark strands." Another elder whispered, "The lost art of binding." Kojo interrupted. "What's binding?" A younger woman answered. "A forbidden form of beadwork. The strands don't just carry memory. They carry control." Adama added, "A strand can be tied to a name, a voice, a life. If corrupted, it doesn't protect. It possesses." Kojo's face hardened. "So Nathan was possessed?" "No," Adama said. "He was a vessel, a warning." Mama Nyamike spoke. "The final moon is 2 days away. If Mame completes her ritual under the full light, she can activate all her strands." Another woman added, "And every person wearing beads from her stall will no longer be their own." Kojo's stomach dropped. "Wait, she has a shop?" Adama nodded grimly. "She opened it quietly in Adabraka. She calls it Bead and Bone." Later that night, Adama and Kojo sat by a clay fire pot in the back of the compound. "She wasn't always like this," Adama said. "Tell me about her," Kojo urged. Adama's eyes drifted to the flame. "We met when we were girls, both raised by beaters, both marked by the old ways. But Mame, she wanted more. She didn't like rules. She said the beads shouldn't just remember the past. They should shape the future." Kojo leaned in. "What happened?" "One night, during the harvest moon, she tried to create a strand that could erase memories. She said it was for healing, for women who wanted to forget their pain." That doesn't sound evil. At first it wasn't. But the strand worked too well. A girl lost her voice and never got it back. We confronted Mame. She didn't care, said power required sacrifice. Adama's face hardened. "We cast her out. She cursed the circle and vanished." Kojo stared into the fire. "And now she's back, with a shop, with strands binding who knows how many people." Adama stood, her silhouette glowing in the firelight. "She's not back for business. She's back for the final strand." Kojo frowned. "What's that?" She turned to him. "The very first strand she and I ever made, together. A fusion of memory and will, a bond. It was never meant to be worn. It was meant to anchor our friendship." Kojo stood slowly. "But if she wears it now, she becomes something else, a bearer of all forgotten pain. And she won't use it to remember. She'll use it to rewrite." In the corner of the courtyard, Mama Nyamike whispered to an assistant, "Summon the rest of the sisterhood. Light the lamps. The final moon approaches. And the city must remember its roots, or be undone by the beads it forgot." Across the city, in a basement lit with only candlelight, Mame Korkor stood before a wall covered in photographs. Faces of women, men, children, all customers. Each name was pinned with a color-coded bead strand. She murmured words in a language long forgotten, holding the photo of Adama in her hands. "You left me with ashes, but I rebuilt with embers." She tied a final knot. And outside, in the city, a young girl suddenly dropped her drink and began to weep, without knowing why. For the first time in days, the city slept, but uneasily. In alleyways, dreams stirred. In bedrooms, beads shimmered under shirts and wrappers. The moon crept slowly into the sky, almost full, almost ready. And in Kojo's apartment, Adama lay awake on his bed, staring at the ceiling. She had chosen to stay the night. not out of fear, but because the weight of the coming storm had finally pressed too hard on her chest. Kojo entered the room, 2 mugs of ginger tea in his hands. "You can't sleep either?" he asked. She took the mug, nodding silently. "I dreamt of her," she said. "She was wearing the red strand, but it wasn't glowing, it was bleeding." Kojo sat beside her. "I don't understand how 2 girls, raised with the same teachings, ended up so different." Adama sipped her tea. "Because one of us survived pain, and the other became it." There was silence for a moment. Then Kojo said quietly, "Tell me what she did to you." Adama's hands trembled slightly, but she didn't hide it. 7 years ago, when she and Mame were barely 20, they both fell for the same man, a traveling poet from Kumasi named Kwame. He was smooth with words and even smoother with silences. He'd buy beads from both of them, claimed he wore them as bracelets to keep your energy close. Adama had loved him deeply, but Mama had loved him differently, possessively. One day, Adama found her red strand missing from her shelf. She searched everywhere. Then she saw a picture of Kwame wearing it, posted online with the caption, "My muse ties her magic on me." It wasn't her caption. It wasn't her post. Mame had given him the strand. "He chose me," Mame had whispered when Adama confronted her. "Because I don't beg to be loved, I command it." What happened after was never fully spoken. But that night Kwame fell mysteriously ill. By morning he was dead. Heart failure, they said, but Adama knew. He wore the red strand, with 2 energies inside it. Hers and Mame's. A strand that had been made for memory, but turned into a noose. Back in Kojo's apartment, Adama wiped a tear and whispered, "He didn't deserve to die. But our power was never meant to compete. It was meant to harmonize." Kojo placed a hand on hers. "You've carried that guilt alone all this time?" She nodded. "It's why I stopped binding beads with others. Why I only make them in silence. Why I stayed hidden." Kojo studied her face, not just beautiful but brave. He had never met anyone like her. He leaned in slowly. She didn't pull away. Their lips touched, softly, briefly, then her eyes met his. "Don't wear my beads, Kojo." He smiled. "I wasn't going to." She shook her head. "I mean it. I don't want to protect you with magic. I want you to choose me with your spirit clear. If we're bound, let it be with truth, not thread." He nodded, heart pounding. "Then I choose you, beadless." But across town, someone else was preparing a curse of love. Mame Korkor stood in the middle of her studio, holding a wax figure wrapped in black thread. Around its waist, a single strand, red, threaded with obsidian stones and sealed with wax made from burning sandalwood, salt, and a drop of Kojo's blood, taken from a discarded tissue she had collected earlier from his car. She whispered, "You stand with her, but your heart is unguarded. You are not hers yet. You are mine, in memory, if not in body." She placed the figure on a stone plate and covered it with a cloth. "When the moon rises full, your spirit will wander, and in your wandering, I will welcome you." Back at Kojo's apartment, sleep finally came, slow, thick, pulling both of them under. And in the early hours before dawn, Kojo began to stir. His body was asleep, but his spirit began to drift. He stood in a dream, a vast white space where strings of beads floated midair. He walked between them, drawn to a red strand glowing faintly. He reached out to touch it. Suddenly, Mame appeared, draped in shadows, smiling. "You came," she whispered. Kojo's dream self tried to turn, but he couldn't move. "You wear no bead," she said, "but you've touched her heart. That's enough." She placed a black bead in his palm. It melted, and Kojo screamed. He jolted awake. Adama sat up instantly. What happened? He was sweating, trembling. His eyes were distant. "I saw her," he said. "In the dream. She touched me. Something's wrong." Adama placed her hands on his face. "She's marked you. She's trying to bend you." She said, "The moon will finish it." Adama stood, urgency in her voice. "Then we can't wait. If she completes the binding, your memory of me, your truth, may become hers." Kojo frowned. "You mean I'll forget you?" She nodded. "Or worse, Remember me as an enemy." She opened her bag and pulled out a clay bowl, oils, and a small green bead. "This is not a binding. It's a shield," she said. "It won't connect us, but it'll protect your memory." She mixed the oil with ground bark and an herb called nyanya, the same herb her grandmother used during spiritual cleansing. Then she touched Kojo's forehead, chest, and palms. She tied the green bead on a thin string and looped it around his wrist. "This will not hold your heart," she said, "but it will protect your truth." Kojo exhaled. "And if she tries again?" Adama's voice was steady. "Then I will answer." The moon was one night away. The game had shifted, and Kojo Mensah was no longer just a detective. He was now part of the war between memory and manipulation. And Adama? She had just decided she was done hiding. The plan was dangerous. But so was doing nothing. Adama stood in the courtyard of the Daughters of Ananse, surrounded by flickering oil lamps and quiet voices of the sisterhood. The moon would be full by midnight, and Mame Korkor was preparing to complete her ritual, a dark binding that could control every soul who unknowingly wore her corrupted beads. Kojo stood beside Adama, the green bead still tied tightly around his wrist, a protective shimmer pulsing against his skin like a heartbeat. "She wants you," Adama said. "Not because she loves you, but because you're her final key. You've touched me, felt me. That connection threatens her control." Kojo looked grim. "So what do we do?" Adama turned to Mama Nyamaki and the council. "We set a trap. The trap was simple in theory. Kojo would go to bead and bone, pretending to be under Mame's influence. He'd let her believe her ritual had succeeded, that Adama had been forgotten, that he had crossed over. Meanwhile, Adama and the sisterhood would track the energy of the ritual strand and intercept the final binding before it could take hold. But if anything went wrong, if Mom saw through him, the protection bead could fail, and Kojo's mind would be hers. At 10:47 p.m., Kojo stepped into the dim-lit shop in Atabraka. Outside, it looked like any other artsy boutique. Inside, it smelled of smoke and lavender, and every corner was draped with shadow and silk. Beads of every color hung from the walls. But not one strand was purely decorative. Each carried intent, and some carried curses. Mame Korkor stood behind the counter, wearing a black robe with red lining. Her eyes shimmered with oil. She smiled as he entered. "I was expecting you," she said softly. Kojo gave a slight nod, breathing slowly. "I woke up and couldn't stop thinking about you." Her smile widened. "You remembered then?" "I did," he said. "Everything. I don't know why I was so drawn to her, but I see it now. It was you all along." Mame stepped around the counter slowly, watching his every move. "And the green bead?" she asked, eyeing his wrist. "Protection," he said. "She gave it to me, but I took it off before I came." He held up his hand. It was bare. The real bead was hidden in his sock. Mame smiled, satisfied. "You were wise to come. You're a vessel, Kojo, strong, resilient, but confused. Adama wove weakness into you. I will strip it out." She gestured toward the back room. "Come, let us finish what began." At the exact same moment, Adama knelt beside a clay basin in the courtyard of the sisterhood's house. Inside the basin was a mirror shard, ancient, blessed, and bound to Mame's energy from a leftover thread Adama had kept for years. It shimmered faintly under the moonlight. "She's beginning," Mama Nyamakai whispered. Adama dipped her fingers into the mirror water. "We don't have much time." Inside bead and bone, Kojo stepped into a room filled with hanging strands, black, red, and gold. They swayed, though there was no wind. In the center was a mat, and on it, a small altar of bone and beads. Mame walked to the mat and placed a red strand down. "This was the one," she whispered. "The first strand. The one I made with her, before she turned her back on me." Kojo sat, heart pounding. "You'll wear it," she said, "and you will forget her. Forever." She held the strand near his chest. "Say her name," she instructed. Kojo hesitated, then whispered, "Adama." Mame's smile faded. His eyes snapped open, clear. "I remember her," he said, voice rising, "and I'll never forget." Suddenly, the green bead around his ankle flared to life under his jeans. Mame stepped back, furious. "You lied," Kojo stood. "You've done enough. This ends now." Mame lifted her hands. Beads on the walls began to shake violently. The red strand on the mat slithered like a snake. "You think you can stop memory?" she hissed. "I am memory. I am what she buried and pretended never happened." Kojo grabbed a carved staff from the wall and swung at the altar. Beads scattered. The red strand shrieked, yes, shrieked, as if it were alive. At the shrine, Adama saw the shard flash violently. "She's losing control, Mama Nyamiki said. Strike now?" Adama took the last of her sacred oil from her grandmother's collection and poured it onto the mirror shard. May the forgotten return to the light. Back at the shop, Mommy stumbled as the floor shook. Her ritual altar cracked. The red strand hissed, then burst into ash. Adama's voice echoed through the room. "Not physically, but spiritually. You used our bond for power. I used it to heal. That is why you lose." Mame screamed as her beads snapped from the walls and fell lifeless to the floor. Kojo ran. As he exited the shop, the flickering candlelight snuffed out behind him. The door slammed shut on its own, and Mame Korkor's voice howled inside. "This isn't over. You think this is victory? You've only broken the first knot." Kojo returned to the compound just as the moon reached its peak. Adama met him at the gate, eyes wide with fear, then relief. "You're safe?" He nodded, breathless. "She tried. She almost won. But the bond held," Adama whispered. "No," Kojo said. "You held." They embraced under the full moon, surrounded by the silent power of a sisterhood that had just saved the city, not with weapons but with memory, intention, and sacred thread. The streets of Accra seemed calmer the next morning, but beneath the normal hum of traffic and chatter, a new energy stirred, quiet, watchful. It was the silence that comes after a storm that had passed unseen by most, yet deeply felt. But for Adama, the storm wasn't over. It was only changing form. She stood barefoot in her apartment, wrapping a thick strand of gold and white beads around her waist. Beads of light, restoration, and closure. But around her wrist, she tied a thin red thread, not the cursed strand, a new one. One that symbolized rebirth. Today, she wasn't hiding. Today, she would finish what her grandmother began. Meanwhile, in a dark, sealed basement of an abandoned colonial warehouse in Korlegono, Mame Korkor knelt in the center of a symbol drawn in white chalk. Her hair was undone, her beads scattered around her like fallen teeth. The failed ritual had cracked her power, but not her resolve. Her voice was raw, whispering through cracked lips. "They've taken my strand, but they've left me alive." She reached into a clay pot, pulling out a sharp shard of broken bead glass, the same red strand Kojo had destroyed. She sliced her palm, letting blood drip into a small bowl of black oil. "Let the old gods hear me now. I offer pain. I offer betrayal. I offer truth." The liquid in the bowl sizzled. She dropped in 3 items: a lock of Adama's hair from years ago, taken from an old scarf, and a burnt photo of their girlhood ritual, in a bead that had once belonged to their first customer, the dead man Kwame. The mixture turned into a thick, bubbling black smoke. Mame inhaled it, and her eyes turned white. Across town, Kojo was visiting the police tech unit. He had a sample of the corrupted bead from the bead and bone shop, and needed analysis. But what the analyst found shocked him. "These beads aren't just ornamental," she said, adjusting her glasses. "The inner coating has traces of ash, copper, dried herbs, and even trace amounts of human skin cells. Someone fused biological matter into these strands." Kojo frowned. So she wasn't just binding people spiritually. She was tagging them biologically. Worse, the analyst said. Some of these elements respond to temperature and moisture. That means the beads could react to emotion, Kojo finished. Exactly. That explained why so many people claimed they felt heat or burning when wearing her beads during conflict or stress. It wasn't just myth, it was engineered. That night, Adama gathered with the daughters of Anansi at an ancient hill in Aburi, a place her grandmother called the Mouth of Memory. A wide stone circle surrounded a baobab tree believed to be over 300 years old. Beneath it was a sealed clay vault containing ancestral beadwork, protected for generations. Mama Nyamakai opened the vault. Inside were 7 sacred strands. Only one was red. This was made long before your grandmother's time, she said. Worn only during trials of spiritual war. She handed it to Adama. Tonight it's yours. Adama hesitated. What if it consumes me? Mama Nyamaki touched her cheek. You are no longer a girl learning beads. You are a woman shaping memory. You won't be consumed. You will become fire. They lit 7 lamps, formed a circle, and chanted the old songs. Adama stepped into the center. She wrapped the red strand around her waist once, twice, 3 times. A wave of energy burst through the air. Wind, heat, silence. The forest fell still. Birds stopped chirping. The earth pulsed beneath her feet. At that same moment, Mama Korkor, eyes now pale, body trembling, began her final act. She left the warehouse and walked through the city in a black dress, beads dragging behind her like a tail of serpents. As she walked, people wearing her beads began to convulse. In trotro buses, market stalls, classrooms, bedrooms, strangers collapsed or screamed without warning. Their beads pulsed red, eyes rolled back. Mame was taking control. Kojo's phone exploded with alerts. Mass panic in Circle Market. Several young women faint wearing red and black beads. Some claim a woman in black is walking the streets. No face, just light. He turned to the analyst. Find a way to deactivate her strands. Any signal, pulse, frequency, I don't care how. Then he called Adama. She's moving now. It's happening. Adama's voice was calm. I know. I feel it. By midnight, Mame stood atop the Jamestown lighthouse, arms raised, wind howling. She shouted into the night. You forgot me. You cast me aside. But every woman wearing my work remembers me now. From across the city, a wave of screams echoed back. But on the hill in Aburi, Adama raised her arms too, and sang. Not words of war, but remembrance. Each note reminded the beads of their first name, truth, of their first purpose, protection, of their true owner, memory herself. The daughters joined in, creating a song that wasn't loud but deep. It entered the air. It entered the blood. In homes and streets, beads began to cool. The convulsing stopped. Eyes opened. Tears flowed. And in the sky above the lighthouse, a red light exploded. Not fire, but something brighter. Freedom. Mame Korkor fell to her knees. Her voice gone, her power shattered. The last thing she saw was Adama, not in the flesh but standing in spirit before her, wearing the true red strand. Not for revenge, but for victory. A quiet victory built on memory, truth, and mercy. The sun rose slowly over Accra, casting golden light over a city that had no idea it had just been saved from spiritual war. No breaking news, no sirens, no headline read, Woman stops mass possession using sacred beads. But the people knew. They didn't know why the panic stopped, why their beads suddenly felt lighter, why their dreams had shifted overnight. But something inside them remembered. And in a quiet apartment in East Legon, Adama sat on the floor, the red strand now coiled in a clay bowl beside her, surrounded by petals, salt, and light. She was calm, but empty. Kojo arrived before noon, still in yesterday's clothes, exhaustion hanging on his shoulders like a second jacket. He didn't knock. She didn't flinch when he entered. Their eyes met, no words, just knowing. He walked over, knelt beside her, and placed something in her hand, a single bead. It was black, cracked. It had fallen off Mame Korkor's robe as she collapsed at the lighthouse. She's in custody, Kojo said softly. Silent, not talking, she's not even resisting. Adama nodded. She lost more than power. She lost her center. Kojo asked, Do you forgive her? Adama looked down at the broken bead. I don't hate her. I grieve her. A long silence passed between them. Kojo finally asked, What will you do now? That night, Adama returned to the compound of the daughters of Ananse. The sisters welcomed her not with applause, but with quiet reverence. She entered the sacred hall and placed the red strand, now neutral, peaceful, into a clay jar labeled unspoken names. It was the jar reserved for tools no longer needed, no longer feared, just honored. Mama Nyamakai approached her with open arms. "You are ready," she said. "For what?" Adama asked. "To teach." A week later, Bead and Bone was shut down permanently. But the talk didn't stop. Some said Mame had gone mad. Others claimed the spiritual community silenced her out of jealousy. But the truth remained buried in whispers and side glances, as it always had. Adama opened her new space in OSU, not a shop, not a shrine, a studio. She called it the Thread of Memory. No loud banners, no marketing. But people came, not just for beads but for understanding. She taught the meanings behind each color, the risks of misuse, the responsibility of tradition. Mothers brought daughters. Even men came, some seeking forgiveness, others seeking clarity. She didn't sell beads, she taught them how to make their own. Kojo visited often, not as a protector, not as a lover, as a witness to something ancient blooming in new soil. One evening, he found her alone in the studio, staring out at the sunset. He asked, "Do you miss who you were before all this?" She smiled. "No, I was always this, I just hadn't remembered." She turned to him. "You once asked what I'd do next. I've decided. Tell me. I will give the city back its memory." The next day, Adama stood before a group of 20 young women, waist beads laid before them like seeds. She raised her voice and said, "These are not decorations, they are declarations of who you are, what you carry, and what you refuse to forget." The circle echoed the words. And just like that, the healing began. Far away, in a white room with no windows, Mame Korkor sat quietly on her bed. She no longer spoke. But sometimes she hummed the same song she and Adama sang as girls under the moon. The memory was still there, waiting to be redeemed. A year had passed since the night of the full moon. The city of Accra had changed, not in obvious ways, but in quieter, deeper places. You could hear it in the conversations at salons, where mothers now told daughters not just what to wear, but why. You could feel it in marketplaces, where vendors no longer sold beads carelessly, but with reverence. And if you paid attention during sunrise prayers or night walks, you'd see it. Strands of beads tucked beneath clothes, not worn for seduction, but for strength. The city had remembered, and Adama had become its silent historian. Her studio, the Thread of Memory, was now more than a teaching space. It was a movement. Women from Cape Coast to Tamale, and even across the continent, visited to learn about ancestral beadwork, spiritual ethics, and energy protection. Men came too, not to control, but to understand. The walls of the studio were lined with color-coded stories: white, purity, peace, clarity; blue, wisdom, loyalty, calm; green, growth, healing, abundance; yellow, energy, vitality, joy; red, power, memory, rebirth; and black, mystery, protection, shadow work. Each strand was handcrafted, not for sale, but as part of each student's journey. They didn't leave with products, they left with remembrance. One evening after a long class, Adama sat in her private room lighting a candle beside her grandmother's photograph. She wore a soft ivory wrap and a single strand of brown beads around her waist. As the flame flickered, she whispered, "I've done what you asked. I didn't burn the old ways. I built with them." There was no response, of course, but in her heart something settled, like a string finally tied. Across town, Kojo walked into a quiet cafe and ordered ginger tea. He had left the police force 6 months ago, not out of failure, but fulfillment. He'd helped save something bigger than crime. He'd helped save culture. Now he worked as an investigator for the Ministry of Culture and Creative Arts, helping to uncover and protect sacred traditions that were being lost or misused. His phone buzzed. A message from Adama. "I think it's time." Kojo smiled. That weekend, they returned to Asukoko, the village where it had all begun. The baobab tree still stood, proud and unbending. The shrine had been restored with clay and murals. But this time, Adama didn't come for ritual, she came for release. They walked together to the spot where she had once buried her red beads. The soil was soft, warm. She dug gently and pulled out the clay jar. Inside, the red strand was intact, no longer cursed, no longer feared. Kojo took her hand. "What will you do with it?" Adama looked at the strand and smiled. "I will do what we always should have done." She untied it, slowly, then began to weave it into a new strand, one braided with green for healing, blue for truth, and white for clarity. As she wove, she spoke softly. For every girl who was told she was only beautiful, for every woman who was never taught she was powerful, for every memory hidden in silence. Let this be a new name. She tied the final knot, and placed the strand inside a gourd with a folded piece of paper that read, "For the one who needs to remember herself." Then she left it at the base of the tree. No ritual, no incantation, just truth. Later that night, Kojo and Adama sat by the fire. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you never picked up the beads?" he asked. She thought for a moment, then shook her head. "No, because the beads were never the danger. It was the forgetting, the disconnect, the silence, the shame." She looked at him and smiled. "I didn't need to stop making beads. I needed to start telling their story." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. "I've been saving this," he said. Inside was the green bead she had given him the night he nearly lost himself to Mommy's possession. "I want you to keep it now," he said. "I don't need protection anymore." Adama took it, eyes glassy. "No," she replied softly. "You still need it. Not for protection, but to remember how far we've come." Back in Accra, news began to spread of a new cultural exhibit at the National Museum titled "The Waste and the Word, Beads, Power, and the Forgotten Matriarchs." Curated by Adama and sponsored by Kojo's department, it was the first time in Ghana's modern history that the spiritual, cultural, and historical weight of waste beads was publicly honored. Not in private corners, but in bright national spaces. School groups visited, tourists gawked, but most importantly, women remembered. On the final page of the exhibit, a simple poem written by Adama was displayed. "I am not just color wrapped in thread. I am not temptation nor toy nor trap. I am memory. I am a map. Ask me my story, and I will tell you, one bead at a time." And beneath it, a question posed to each visitor. What thread are you wearing, and why? If this story gripped you like it did many others, don't keep it to yourself. Like the video, drop a comment sharing your thoughts, and hit that subscribe button so you never miss a tale where mystery meets culture. Until next time, protect your spirit and wear your truth.